What is happening there, J-Gamer Dude here, and I wanted to ask you one very simple question. Should a DLC expansion fix the core problems of the main game that DLC is meant to support? It's a fascinating subject that does require a bit of talking about, because depending on who you ask, you'll get different sorts of answers and things along those lines. But before I get into the nitty-gritty details of this discussion, just wanted to say, if you like my videos, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Doing all of that does certainly help support and put my channel into the algorithm, so that hopefully my videos do get recommended to more people. Now, getting into the nitty-gritty of the discussion at hand about DLCs fixing the main game, I wanted to talk about Starfield Shattered Space. Currently, it's sitting at mostly negative, both on recent and all reviews period, and does require Starfield. Now, you can't expect a DLC to fix the problems of a main game. All the game's problems, whether it be from a mechanical point of view, whether it be their AI, whether it be the inventory management system, those are all key elements of the original title. So if you have issues with those things, they could very well carry on to the DLC in question. But there are many examples in which it's not necessarily the DLC that fixed the game, but rather the devs that fixed the game and then release DLC after the fact to help support the game that they've worked so hard to actually fix. For example, we have Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, which is sitting at a very positive of recent reviews and very positive for all reviews. Did Cyberpunk 2077 fix the game of Cyberpunk? No, it didn't. They released a 2.0 patch for Cyberpunk 2077 only for current generation of consoles, so that's the PS5 and the Xbox Series S and X, and then they proceeded to launch Phantom Liberty afterwards. So I thought that was actually an interesting way of looking at it, being that they released 2.0 and then also Phantom Liberty kind of at the same time. But it was not, and of course Phantom Liberty was a great expansion on top of it, so not to deny the great quality content that was provided as part of the DLC, it just kind of heightened whatever was already fixed as part of the 2.0 patch. Another really good example of this could be seen as Final Fantasy XIV, which was released in 2010 as a god-awful product that barely worked and proceeded to get unreleased until it got reborn in the form of Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. Now, the funny thing about Final Fantasy XIV Online and Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn between the two releases is that FF14, the 2010 release, was seen as the 1.0 version of Final Fantasy XIV. However, Realm Reborn was actually the 2.0 version of Final Fantasy XIV. Similar, if not exactly like the way in which Cyberpunk released the 2.0 patch before releasing Phantom Liberty. Final Fantasy XIV did release a 2.0 version in the form of A Realm Reborn, and then they went even further beyond that by then releasing expansions every couple of years, I want to say, because we're now up to 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're up to the 5th expansion now, and the game's re-release, or since it kind of re-entered the market, has almost hit 10 years, if not already hit 10 years, something along those lines. Because they brought it back at either 2014 or 2015, but I can't remember exactly what year they brought FF14 back. But hey, it is what it is. I just thought that this was another fascinating example. And this one, less of an example, because it doesn't quite fall under the idea of releasing expansions, but it doesn't make any less of an impact as it has in the gaming space. And we're talking specifically about No Man's Sky, which was released as a very hated game because a lot of promises were made by Hello Games And ultimately, a lot of those features that were expected to be in the game were never in the game. And so since the release in 2016, so now we're about 8 years into the game's life cycle, they have released many major updates and patches that have added those functions and features and further developed the content that they already had. So while they were hated previously, I feel like we can kind of look at the game and be like, okay, because Hello Games committed themselves to making this the game that people wanted to see, that people wanted to play, that they put their heads down and actually made the game they intended to release originally, and that is nothing short of impeccable, especially given that they spent 8 years doing that, and they still are doing that to this day. Many people may say, oh, I regret buying No Man's Sky on launch day, but if they still had a copy today, would they say the same thing? Maybe not. But I just thought that this was an interesting thing to kind of look at. Again, I kind of started off this whole discussion with just the idea of using expansions, but some of these updates, if you actually look at some of the content they put in, they do expand the game in substantial ways, but I suppose something like a Phantom Liberty is still way bigger. Something like the FF14 expansions are way bigger. And then when we look at something like Starfield, where they released the expansion, it is not being received particularly well. It feels like a lesser than product compared to some of the other Bethesda DLCs we've gotten in the past. And the fact that many of the problems of Starfield that people dislike about it, whether it be the buggy and glitchiness, whether it be the way that the AI looks or talks, the way that the combat runs, some of these elements still just don't quite jive with people at the moment. Sure, there's some people that absolutely love the game, but there are some that are obviously critical, and if you are critical of the main game, then Shattered Space may not necessarily bring you back, whereas many of the updates of No Man's Sky absolutely would bring people back into the game. Phantom Liberty would bring back people after the 2.0 patch. FF14, 100%. That's an MMO is the type of game that, due to later releases and addition of substantial pieces and amounts of content, are intended by all accounts to bring players back if they've lapsed or they've moved away from the game. You know, that's kind of the reason that you would add large amounts of content and things along those lines. So with all of that being said, it kind of makes me wonder where Starfield sits. Would Bethesda actually put their head down and make substantial changes to Starfield? I wouldn't say so, because I feel like they're happy with the way in which they make games, and they don't see it any other way. And I feel like as long as Todd the God Howard is there, that may very well remain to be the case. I just thought this was kind of an interesting comparison point to make, but also the fact that just because DLC and expansions were made for games that improved upon the elements of the base game, there were still technically 2.0 patches that fixed the problems of the game or changed things up in ways before the expansion was actually released. And I feel like this also leans very much into the idea of patch culture. Patch culture being something that was introduced in the PS3 generation, PS3 Xbox 360 generation, where you could release a lesser product that may be somewhat buggy, somewhat glitchy, but be able to release a patch to fix those problems later on. Pretty much the idea of fix it in post, and why the idea of something like patient gamers exists to this day. That being said, however, I thought that this was kind of an interesting discussion to put forward. Let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below. Do you guys think that patch culture is really a big problem in the gaming space? What are your thoughts on the idea of 2.0 patches actually fixing a game's problems before getting to the point where an expansion is released, and how that compares and contrasts games between something like, say, Starfield and, say, for example, Cyberpunk 2077, since those are two fairly recent releases that we can kind of put right next to each other, and how ultimately they are seen. by the community that is taking part in playing those games. Because as you can see from the reviews on Steam, it's clear as day as to how things kind of fall. And of course, the idea of releasing a product that is lesser than and allowing patch culture to proliferate the way in which it has, I think that that's also an interesting conversation to be had. But with all that being said, let me know what you guys think about all of that in the comments below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel. I'm aiming for 400 subs in the not too distant future, whenever that may be. But with all that being said, I do upload every day, so I'll see you guys tomorrow.